That's already in the bailout bill. Believe it or not, Paulson can do that. He doesn't have to even ask you anymore. There is a global meltdown coming. It is a global depression, and one world currency and one world financial system is the end game. China said last week they want one global currency. France said yesterday or the day before that they want one world order, a new world order, at the end of this event. 2 nights ago, the government used $900 billion of your money to give loans to businesses and guarantee those loans. Did they even ask you? Continuing my conversation now with the president of Georgia, Mikhail Saakashvili. Mr. President, quickly if we can, you speak very frankly and say things. I was listening to you in the last few minutes, and you don't hear a politician speak the way you do in America. You just lay all your cards down on the table. This is you a couple of days ago under flak jackets. You're being targeted. Now you're standing on an open roof. Do you believe that this will end, Russia will end, if you are dead?
Well, you know, it's not the fact that I was targeted. My people has been targeted, and I couldn't care less whether I was targeted. The worst thing was that I was standing there with my people. They were bombed, and I was just targeted like them. And as elected president, official in charge of their protection, I couldn't do anything about it. But the point here is, it's not about me, it's about the idea of freedom. It's about the future of the whole region. It's about the future of Europe and a new world order.
Britain led the condemnation today of the way Russia is talking about a new Cold War. Using strong language, in diplomatic terms anyway, Foreign Secretary David Miliband said Russia must act responsibly in the dispute over Georgia. And as Neil Connery reports, he accused Russia's President Dmitry Medvedev of being out of touch with the New World Order.
Look, Pat Buchanan was right a few years back when he said that we don't have two parties in Washington, D.C. We have two wings of the same bird of prey. And that is exactly where we are in our country. This is where I come from, the Christian conservative wing of the Republican Party, if you want to categorize it that way. This is what so many of my evangelical brothers and sisters just cannot and have not figured out. They really still labor under this belief, as do many on the other side of the aisle as well, that there is some kind of distinguishable difference between these two parties, that there really is such a thing as a lesser of two evils. But really there's not. As one friend of mine said, we're not faced with a choice between the lesser of two evils. We're faced with a choice of the evil of two lessers. And that's really where we are today in America. Because both of these parties are taking America in an evil direction. I mentioned a minute ago in my address to you that when I become president, the New World Order comes crashing down. The thing that nobody wants to talk about, the third rail in politics, is the manufacturing of this New World Order that we first heard Bush 1 talk about whenever he was president back in the late 80s, but ever since has become pretty much the mantra and the dogma of Washington politics. I don't know whether you have read Mr. McCain's speech before the Hoover Institution here just a few months ago, when he talked about what he's going to do within the first year after he becomes president in creating a brand new League of Democracies. If you have not read this, you need to go Google it up and read it for yourself. This is the United Nations on steroids. We are talking about organizations, international globalist entities that literally are usurping the authority, the sovereignty, and the independence of the United States of America. I hear John McCain talking all over the place about how we are an interdependent nation. He uses that word all over the place. Well, ladies and gentlemen, when our founding fathers signed that great document that we've heard about this morning, it was not the Declaration of Interdependence, it was the Declaration of Independence. We are an independent, sovereign state. And yet we have forces in Washington, D.C. today from both parties that want to merge America into this international globalist order in which constitutional government will not exist. And I think one of the things that all of us on this platform are sensing, and I think one of the things that Ron Paul is sensing, that causes him to do what he's doing, that causes him to go to the effort that he's gone to, extraordinary effort, to bring this group together, to bring you all together in all this entire campaign. The reason is because we all sense that if we do not address these fundamental principles that are being sacrificed by these two major parties here in the very near future, we're not going to have to worry about any of it, because the freedoms and the independence and the constitutional form of government that we've enjoyed will no longer exist. We are fighting for the preservation of our very form of government. That's why what Ron Paul is doing is so important, and that's why we on the stage are here this morning.
When Ron Paul was running for president of the United States, he had controversial views, caused a lot of people to dismiss him as out of touch or on the fringe or worse, and some things he is on the fringe on. It is unfortunately our loss that people, you didn't have to vote for him, but you should have listened to him. I don't agree with Ron Paul on everything, not by a long shot, but one thing I do agree with him on is the economy. And when you look back at this man's economic positions and you see the red flags that he was talking about, I mean years ago, you've got to give credit where credit is due. Now, what I'm wondering is, have the billions we've spent on the bailouts of Freddie and Fannie and AIG, is that even constitutional? The maverick himself, the actual maverick in the great state of Texas, Congressman Ron Paul. Congressman, help me out on this. Is this constitutional? I mean, I was sitting here watching the bailouts happen. The president's not there. It's just the Treasury Secretary and the Fed. And then a bunch of people are like they're going into a pawn shop. How much you give me for this?
I think your suspicions are correct. It's absolutely not constitutional, but the monetary system is unconstitutional, and these problems have been building for decades. So what Treasury did and what the Fed did is unconstitutional. The constitutional role is for Congress to regulate the money and its value, and they're totally neglectful. Well, but they didn't do anything about this. They're just sitting on the sidelines, sitting on their hands.
They're saying what Woodrow Wilson helped create, of putting the Fed in here, that makes it constitutional. But if I read the Constitution, isn't Congress in charge of the purse strings? Only Congress can spend my money, right?
That is right, and they're getting around it this way. They spent $85 billion yesterday, and they say, well, it wasn't appropriated, we just created the money. But they're stealing value from your dollar by increasing the supply of money. They devalue your currency. You pay the tax by higher prices. And the whole process of appropriation and the Congress being responsible, totally neglectful. Right now, this week, I got to thinking, Congress ought to just go home. I think they're irrelevant if they don't take upon themselves the role that they're supposed to perform.
Do you think we're headed towards 1929, 1979, or a 1989-style Soviet collapse?
It could be the '89 Soviet collapse. It won't be the same, but the system will have to be revamped.
And how long do you think before? I mean, today is another anniversary. I had you on a couple of weeks ago, and you gave a speech, I don't know, 2 years ago, and you said, this is coming, and I had you on that anniversary of that speech, and you were dead right. I think today is another one where you said in 2003, you called again for things to happen, and that's what's happening this week. So how long before we see the real ramifications of this?
Well, if one understands Austrian economics, you can predict trends, but you can't predict precipitating events. You can tell when the foundation has eroded, and it has eroded. So the precipitating events that causes the panic is an emotional reaction, but the fundamentals are such that we're on the verge of a collapse. It could happen if we do something foolish or stupid, or continue to do the things that we're doing today by bailing out everybody any day and nationalize all our industry. Eventually, the world will give up on our dollar. We're still benefiting, believe it or not, with the privilege of issuing the reserve currency of the world. And now, so many people hold the dollar, they're cooperating with us on this fraud, and to the exclusion of the Congress. Congress neglects their responsibility. The Federal Reserve shouldn't even exist under the Constitution. There's no explicit authorization for a central bank, and the Treasury is just complicit in all that we do. Economic law will end this eventually.
I will tell you, Congressman, that while I'm not a conspiracy theorist by any stretch of the imagination, I will tell you that it almost feels like we're being set up by players that, for instance, the Secretary of the Treasury right now, he worked at Goldman Sachs. He was a big guy at Goldman Sachs. All of the players, they all know each other. It's the old boy network here.